Greetings my lovelies, and thank you for stopping by the circle today. Today's video is all about reading and what can cause you to put a book down, which is like the greatest sin, I guess, for those who are readers, but in all honesty, like, life is too short for shitty books. So let's go ahead and go into the reasons why I will put a book down, and these are things that you should probably keep in mind while you're working on your book, because I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that feels the same way. Now when it comes to books, I have one simple rule that I came up with that helps me get through books that suck, so that I don't suffer and continue working through my to-read mountain. And I call it the 5 to 100 rule. And so what that means is that if a book has not grabbed my attention within the first 5 chapters or the first 100 pages, whichever one comes first, I put it away. Sometimes I'll extend that a little bit if I like certain elements about the book and I'm kind of willing to give it a chance, because sometimes it takes a bit for a story to get started. But if I've made it definitely to the halfway point and I just don't give a flying fuck about your characters or your story or where this is going, I'm flipping to the last page, I'm figuring out what's going on, and I'm putting that sucker down, and I'm just like, oh well, and I'm just moving on with my life. So here are some of the things that I've noticed that really, if this happens in a book, I'm definitely putting it down. Thing number one, which is the most important thing, is just being uninterested. If I don't care about your story or your characters or just anything in it, why am I going to invest the time and energy to continue to read the book? Reading for me is something that is equal parts enjoyable and to learn something, because I read both fiction and non-fiction books. However, if I just don't care, if I find it so utterly boring, why am I going to continue? There are millions of books out there that I want to get to read in the lifespan that I have, and I'm not going to waste it on one book that I just don't care. So I put it aside. Now that's not to say that if there's a book that I find interesting, because I do kind of work through the classics sometimes, and they reach a part where they just get kind of boring or difficult to read, I'll put them aside and I'll read something else for a while and then I'll come back to it, because I'm still interested in the book. I just don't want to be on the struggle bus right now. Thing number two, completely unlikable or unrealistic characters. Now I know that liking and unliking a character is highly subjective. Everything in this list is highly subjective. But these kind of features are things that I've seen around the interweb of why people put the book down. So I'm not going to say what is an unlikable character other than it's underdeveloped, absolutely boring, and they act completely unrealistically, even for fiction. If that happens, I don't care how good your world building is, and I might hold on just a little bit longer, but I will reach a point where I say, man, I just don't care, screw this guy, and I'm dropping it. Thing number three, terrible world building and world building execution. I don't need an info dump of everything of how your world is supposed to work. I do like to learn that as I read. However, you have to have enough of a setup for me to understand how your world works. If I am struggling to figure out your different groups of people, or how your magic system works, or how your cultural structure thing is going on, and who is who and what is what, like, that's gonna make it really hard for me to care about anything else, because I'm spending too much time trying to figure out the rules of your world. This tends to be more of like what hitches up in fantasy. It's either you explain too much or you don't explain enough. Sometimes your characters can be a saving grace, or your plot can be a saving grace for shitty world building, but sometimes when you already have an uninteresting story, terrible characters, and terrible world building, oh god, yes, like, I'm just sorry, no thank you. Number 4 is a new addition that I have just recently kind of stumbled across lately, and that is terrible formatting. Now this mostly comes in with like books that have multiple points of views, and if it's not done correctly, having multiple points of views and how you switch back and forth between those characters can be very jarring. I had read one book to where there was no chapters, just a chunk of time for one period and then a chunk for another period, and then they just kept switching back and forth between all these different people. One, I have ADHD and my brain doesn't quite work normal, and that just was so hard for me to keep track of who, what, when, where, why. That's also why I have an issue with the classics, because their rules for formatting aren't necessarily the same, especially when there are in large group situations or you're not always introduced to characters. People just start talking and you're supposed to know who they are, and I just get really confused. Like, I'm not even going to deny that. Another thing is where you have characters who have their own whole chapters, and it's just like, this doesn't need to be a whole chapter. This could have been like an add-on to the previous things. Like, there's a lot of useless information in here, and it's just dragging the story down, but you feel like each individual character needs its own chapter. Ugh. So frustrating, so frustrating. Now, I only have like those 4 things because those really are just the big ones. The 5th reason of why I will typically sometimes put a book down is that I'm not in the right state of mind for that. But that is just, you know, we all go through book funks where we just can't read anything, and that's not really any fault of the book, that's on personal. But the other 4 are things that are conscious choices that the author made that just turn me off. Now, everything in this list is completely subjective to me. These are my own opinions. You may agree with them, you may not. However, I will say this, that sometimes I may not like a book, but I'll finish it and I'm like, whatever, I'm not going to read the rest of it. And then I'll go back and reread it later on at the encouragement of somebody else, or let's say like a movie's coming out about it. I'm looking at you, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, and Percy Jackson. And then I go back and I reread the book and I just kind of keep going, and then the series gets better and then I fall in love with it. And there are some books that I read that I put down because I'm like, oh my god, this sucks! And then I come back and I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing! And I give them a second chance. Again, my frame of mind does also affect a lot of what will get on my nerves. And when it comes to reviewing these books that I have put aside because I'm like, I'm not reading them, I typically don't leave reviews if I don't finish them unless I have some like major issues with the book. So there you have it. Those are reasons of why me as a reader will put a book down and not read it, and maybe even leave a bad review or no review at all, which is honestly worse. You know, I'd rather have a negative review than no reviews. So I'm actually quite interested in what are reasons that you guys don't finish a book, and just comment down below and let me know. So that is all that I have time for today, and I will catch you all later. Bye.